So I may regret making this video. I know on my channel I've talked a lot about using Amplify, but I've recently ran into a bug which has made me actually second guess everything I've been saying on my channel. This video is going to basically be me walking you through a real life debugging scenario. I'm going to show you all the things that I kind of attempted to do, and I'm going to talk about the issue that I'm having with Amplify. So the first thing I want to talk about is cost. I was recently kind of looking at my Amplify dashboard and my AWS costs, and I noticed that Amplify is actually costing more than I think it would have costed from reading through the pricing. And I will say that again, it's still cheap. I mean, it's like $1. I'm getting charged $1.08 for Amplify, but still for a serverless Lambda-based deployment, that seems pretty expensive. So I wanted to dive into like what is causing this to be so much more expensive than I thought it was. And AWS will give you a breakdown of like costs and stuff. And the main thing that's costing so much money is these Amplify hosting compute seconds, right? So from what I understand, when you deploy your next application to Amplify, every time you hit one of your endpoints, whether it's like a static asset endpoint or like an API endpoint, you're going to get charged for how long that Lambda takes to run behind the scenes, right? And so for every second, you are charged a certain amount. And once you get to 11,000 seconds, which seems like quite a bit for a service that's supposed to be cached behind a CDN, right? So I'm kind of like wondering, why is this so high? And if you're not familiar with like services and Lambda, you might look at this and be like, okay, this is normal. But for me, there was like red flags. For hosting a really basic application that gets no traffic, a lot of red flags coming up. And then I was looking at the Amplify breakdown for my billing dashboard, and again, they're getting charged like 20 cents a day, right? This could basically blow up to be 10, 15, 20 bucks, which in that case, I might as well just use vercel to begin with, right? So that kind of led me down a path of debugging and figuring out what's causing this to be so high. So the first thing I did was I went to my logs, because the highest charge for Amplify was the execution time of my backend Lambdas, right? So if you go to your CloudWatch log groups, you can look at all your different logs for your system, and you can actually kind of download those into a CSV if you want to, and kind of do some analytics on them if you want. There's also CloudWatch Insights. I guess it's called Log Insights, that you can run kind of custom queries to gather and aggregate data about your logs. So what I did was I took all of my logs. I kind of went back to like the past 24 hours. I took all my logs and I'm like, where are the requests basically taking the most time? Like what is actually being requested? So of course, using ChatGPT, I have a huge thread of me asking questions. I wanted to generate a log insight to give me the information that I wanted. And so once I've done that, I basically typed in a little query that ChatGPT told me to type in, because I didn't want to waste time trying to figure out how to actually write this by hand because I'm lazy. And that gave me insight, no pun intended, as to like what endpoints are being hit the most. And so I saw here there's a bunch of like static endpoints and images that are being hit over and over again. And I'm like, okay, well, if Amplify is supposed to deploy this to a CDN, why am I getting 646 requests to Lambda to basically process returning the PNG, right? This doesn't seem right. There's something wrong going on here, especially with all these static chunks. These should be static and hosted on the CDN and cached. But the fact that I'm getting so many requests for all these static assets kind of raised some red flags to me, which led me to my next point is, if you ever going to use a service or a library, go and read through the issues. Amplify has 575 issues, and some of them, this one is basically outlining that, hey, like, I'm not getting any cache hits from CloudFront on my requests, which is kind of what led me down to the path of like, okay, maybe CloudFront's not actually caching anything. Maybe that's why I'm getting so many backend API requests for these static assets, because CloudFront's not caching anything. So there's this open issue. I mean, this is open, what, 2022? It's almost a full year. It's even older than a year. It's a year old. That kind of gives me insight as to like, okay, that kind of makes me worried that, you know, one of the largest companies, the most wealthiest companies in the world, can't go through and actually like fix these open issues. There's 575 of them. That's kind of giving me some red flags. So I took the log insight information and I plopped it into Google Sheets just to kind of get a better breakdown of like, okay, what is causing the most traffic on this little side project? We got a speed.mp4 video, which takes a little bit of time, which makes sense. I mean, like, that's the main video on the landing screen. But again, we have like all these static assets. Like, why are these being requested so many times? I also made another breakdown of like, what is taking the most duration, right? So this is the actual API endpoint that generates the AI images. This makes sense. This should take up a lot of time because it does have to hit the Dolly API and just sit there churning. But All these other things, like literally 3/4 of the pie chart is all just static images and other things. So I'm kind of thinking, okay, maybe I'm just doing something wrong with my deployment and these aren't being cached. Okay, if you add up all of these, this is a lot of execution time that Amplify is charging me, which, you know, they shouldn't be charging me because they should be caching this. So that led me down a path of like, okay, let's look at a Next.js deployment on Amplify. And in fact, this is specifically a T3 stack deployment. If you look here, this is the default stuff that you get from Theo's T3 stack. And if you look at all the requests, you see that we do get, this is a miss from CloudFront. Let me just go ahead and refresh this a couple times. The first time you hit your endpoint or your next app, you're going to have a lot of CloudFront misses. And what that means is like CloudFront sits in front of your Next.js application, and it's going to cache your stuff for a certain amount of time. If you haven't hit that endpoint yet, then it's going to be a cache miss. If someone else has requested this same JavaScript file or the same images, they will get a cache hit. So let's just go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and just refresh the page one more time. And all of these you'll see now say cache hit. So CloudFront is caching these assets for a certain amount of time. I don't know how long they're caching stuff for because I have the max age set as a year. But for some reason, if you let this sit for a while and you refresh the page, I get a bunch of cache misses again. So that's another red flag, is like, okay, Next.js is returning a year for my assets, but whatever Amplify is doing under the hood, overriding that that cache control max age, or it's doing its own thing. Well, I guess technically max age is just the max age. There could be like an average age or like a lower limit age that CloudFront is doing. But you'll notice if I keep on refreshing the page, I get CloudFront hits, which means that my API lambdas are not being invoked, which means I will not get charged for this, or I'll get charged only for the bandwidth, right? CloudFront is going to cache this stuff and just return the size of the payload, which is like 26 kilobytes. But these things kind of start adding up. So this works. I know that Amplify works for a static application, right? A basic T3 application. Now, what's different about mine is if I clear this and refresh the page a couple of times, let's go ahead and warm up the lambdas, make sure stuff is stored in the CloudFront. If I do this and I click on any of these JavaScript files, you'll notice that I keep getting misses from CloudFront. Okay, you can't see it on that view. Let me go ahead and do over here. Let's see if you can see this. All right, see here it says X cache miss from CloudFront. I keep on doing this, and you think that CloudFront would cache this stuff, but it keeps on saying miss from CloudFront. So that's giving me some red flags. It's like, why is CloudFront not caching my stuff? That's the whole reason that we're using Next, right? It's the whole reason we're using Amplify and Vercel, is because they did a lot of engineering under the hood to cache all your stuff to make your site super fast and performant, right? So that led me down a path of more investigation. I probably spent a lot of time trying to figure this out, which made me find this randomserverfault.com blog post. And some guy saying that, hey, like I'm getting a bunch of misses from CloudFront on my, I don't know if he even talks about CloudFront here. Yeah, he's just talking about CloudFront. If you scroll down, the answer says you are probably forwarding cookies on CloudFront. So every time you refresh the page in the browser creates a new cookie hash, and the CDN thinks it's a new request. You have to turn off cookie forwarding at CloudFront so that it doesn't like not cache your stuff. So let's move that back down. So I kept on investigating. I went down and found another post here. This is a feature request option to disable caching based on cookies, and that is on the Amplify hosting GitHub repo that was open in 2021, almost 2 years ago. So if you scroll through here, they're saying that, hey, I'm using something that generates a new cookie every time a user loads the page, right? And because the way Amplify sets up CloudFront, the cache key is using your cookie. So basically, they're never going to cache anything, and there's no way to specify, from what I can understand, how to override the cache key to not use your cookies. You scroll through here and there's a bunch of people saying +1, this would be useful. I left a comment saying this is kind of a critical thing that's needed. Again, this is a 2-year open issue. They don't seem like they're going to address it. How does a company with that much money not address the issues that their customers are opening? Kind of concerning. And then if you go and you investigate the documentation on CloudFront, they say by default, CloudFront does not consider cookies when processing requests or responses, or when caching your objects in cloud locations. If CloudFront receives 2 requests that are identical except for what's in the cookies header, Then by default, CloudFront treats the request as identical and returns the same object from both requests. So even the docs, from what I'm reading with my own eyes, they are saying CloudFront does not use cookies when they cache your crap. So why does Amplify go against the standard of CloudFront and go ahead and use the cookies? I don't know. And that kind of made me think, okay, what is in my application that is causing my cookies to basically cause issues? And if you go to my application here, and let me go ahead and put this down. I'm not used to it being on the side. I have some cookies here. I have NextAuth that's setting up cookies. I also have Stripe that's setting up cookies. And I also have Google Analytics. So it turns out Google Analytics will generate a new ID every time I refresh this page. So it turns out that all these cookies are sent over to my backend when I make these requests. Like if you go over here and you look at the request cookies, let me just go ahead and refresh the page real quick. Let me disable my cache, and I'm going to look at any of these. And if I go to request headers, you'll see that those cookies are passed over in every single request. Now the issue is I do believe every time I make this refresh, like let's just go ahead and put this line here. I'm going to do the same thing and find the generate thing right here. Let's just grab my cookies. If you scroll all the way to the end, you'll notice that the cookie actually changes every single time. This is probably like a timestamp, but it's 17 here and it's 33 below. So every time a user refreshes the page, like a new user creates a new session on your app, Google Analytics is setting up a new cookie, which means CloudFront thinks it's a brand new user, which means that CloudFront hits your Lambda API is going to charge you that execution time for a file that's never changed. But because your cookie has changed, they're going to send you back a non-cache version of that, and you're going to incur that cost. So that's kind of the whole path I went down to try to figure out what the heck is going on. Why is my application not caching anything in CloudFront? And it's Google Analytics. So basically, I either need to turn off Google Analytics so that the cookie is not changed every single time the person basically hits the app for the first time. It's not even just Google Analytics. I mean, since I'm using NextAuth, every user who logs in, they're going to get a different cookie stored in their browser, which is going to get sent over to the backend by default. So I don't think CloudFront's even going to cache for people who log in differently. Like this image will not be cached between users on Amplify for some reason because of this cookie thing that has been open for 2 years that they have not addressed. That's my assumption. If I said anything wrong in this video, just call me out and say, you're just not understanding how some of this stuff works, because I honestly don't understand a lot of stuff. But from what I'm understanding, there is some very strange behavior going on, which is making me second guess if I should even be using Amplify to begin with. So if you kind of watch my videos and you're like, oh yeah, let's use Amplify because Cody uses Amplify, I would not trust anything I say on this channel. This is just me. This channel is me basically posting what I've learned along the way. And a week ago, I thought this was great. Today, I'm having a lot of concerns. So that led me down to another path of there's this framework called SST, which has been around for a hot minute. So there's a developer who works on this. I don't know if he works on this full time or just part time or something, but he has worked on this SST framework / library, which I think is an abstraction over AWS CDK, which is an infrastructure as code tool that Amazon provides, but he makes it a lot easier. And I do see that there is a way to deploy a Next application. And he has a video that came out in a blog post April 17th. So this is really recent. This is like a week or two ago, right? And what I'm actually going to try to do is, can I get a fully set up Next application deployed by just running these commands? Go check out this video. It's kind of actually pretty funny. But I'm going to try to run these 3 commands and see how easy is it to deploy Next on Amazon using this SST library. So let's just go ahead. I'm going to go to my workspace real quick. And I'm going to go ahead and just say create Next app, and I'll say my example app. That should set up a basic Next app. By the way, when I say I went hard in debugging this issue, I created a folder. I have like bash scripts, shell scripts. I'm trying to download logs from CloudWatch. I'm trying to write scripts to parse through them and get the analytics to figure out how long stuff took. I went in on this bug because it was really annoying me. Like, why is my stuff not getting cached? So let's go ahead and open up this directory with SST. And again, I haven't tried this thing before. So if we run into snags, then that'll be a solid review of what this framework does. So let's just go ahead and run the next command, set up SST. I think that'll create a project or a directory in this project to basically enable this next app to work on AWS. I'll say yes. I'll say npm install. All right, that looks like it's done setting up. Let's just go ahead and do a npm SST deploy and see what happens. Please enter a name you like to use for your personal project. I'll just say my example app with that. So overall, I've just been kind of really annoyed with Amplify, and like I told my Discord, I'm on the verge of switching over to Vercel. Like I'm not saying Vercel's a bad company, but at the end of the day, like when you're one of the top 5 companies in the world in terms of revenue and you can't create a product that's actually good, why would I use your product? Like why would I use the AWS Amplify? And not to throw shade, I hope I'm not giving any misinformation out there. If there actually is something that I'm doing wrong, then I'll own up to it. I'll pin a comment and say, hey, you know, this video is wrong. But a lot of times engineers don't have time to really investigate these services and understand how everything works. So if it doesn't work the first time we do it, or if we run into strange edge cases like this, it makes your whole product look terrible. And it's frustrating because I just made like a course like a couple of weeks ago where I showed people how to deploy to Amplify. And now I feel bad because it's like, yeah, you can get your application deployed to Amplify. Yeah, it'll still be cheap and it'll still work. I mean, my app still works great, but there's like this small little nuance that's really annoying me that's making me want to switch, because that's just my personality. It's like you're signing up for something that says it caches your stuff, but the moment you add Google Analytics to your site, it no longer caches anything. That's a big issue in my opinion. So this stuff is still running. It's been a while. I don't know if it's frozen or if it's just slow. I would think there'd be better progress indicators on this this framework or library so that I don't think it's just stuck. But this is actually the common state that you deal with when you're dealing with Amazon. A lot of stuff just takes a long time to deploy off the Amazon, especially if you're using CDK. Like I bet you if I logged into Amazon right now and I go to CDK, or not CDK, Cloud Formation, right? CDK uses Cloud Formation under the hood, which is basically what SST is using. So you can see it's still creating, which is why it's taking so long. And the question is what exactly is it creating? It looks like it's creating event rules. I don't know what that actually is, but it's taking quite a while to deploy that. Okay, it looks like it made some progress. I'm just impatient. It took like 2-3 minutes, I think. So now it's building my Next.js application. That's good. Again, this is the first time ever using SST for my next deployment. So we're going to see if this actually works. I'm hoping I can just get a URL after this all finishes and I can just load up my app and be happy that this thing worked. And then I'm also going to test out the caching on this to make sure it actually doesn't have the same issue I just ran into, which might be hard to do because I'd have to like either set up Google Analytics or just create cookies and like change them. Now, as far as what I understand about SST, they have like their own constructs that you import and you can kind of set up an application. And these are just wrappers for CDK TypeScript like functions basically. So you can create a stack. You can set up a Next.js site via like, you know, object-oriented programming with the constructor, and you'll end up getting an output of a URL that prints out to your console when it's done. So we will get that URL when this is done, which is good. That's what I was hoping for. But you might ask yourself, why would you use SST over using Amplify or over using Vercel? Again, what I have noticed in the industry is that the more you have control over your resources in your infrastructure as code, the easier it is for you to fix issues yourself, right? If you don't have control over this stuff, you are kind of dependent on these third-party services to fix it for you. And like we saw on the Amplify scenario, there's open issues that have been open for 2 years. And there's absolutely no comments from the engineers that work at Amazon of like, are they actually addressing this? Or is this just a stale issue, part of the other 600 almost issues? So there is a beauty of being able to finally gain control how your stuff is deployed and manage that stuff, but it comes at a cost in terms of like time, right? In order to understand how AWS SDK works, how SST works, how to basically write infrastructure as code to get all this stuff deployed out and manage it yourself, it takes engineering time and effort, right? It's not an easy thing to understand. For example, right now it's deploying a CloudFormation stack, right? If at any point one of these things fails, the entire stack basically rolls back, it's deleted, and me as the developer, I had to figure out what the heck went wrong, and you can end up spending hours trying to debug this type of stuff. Okay, so that's like the trade-off. I use Terraform at work for all of our infrastructure as code. So we write a bunch of Terraform code, click a deploy button, it spins up all your S3 buckets, all your open search clusters, your DynamoDB databases, your API gateways, your Lambdas. It does all that for us. We basically automated everything so we can deliver our code to our client and they can click a single button to have their entire infrastructure set up for them. SST is basically the same thing, except for they abstract a lot of the, they do a lot of heavy lifting for you under the hood, which is great. But again, the downfalls of this is that it's slow. This thing is taking quite a long time just to deploy a single next application. And maybe it's because it's the first time I run this. I mean, CloudFront does take quite a while to like spin up. So have some patience. You are getting a fully deployed Next.js application for free, but at the cost of it's going to be a little bit slower than deploying to something like Vercel, who already has their own like CDN, I believe. Actually, I don't know if Vercel uses their own CDN or if they use like CloudFront under the hood. I think they have their own CDN, but I'll check back on this in a little bit. And again, I'm doing all this. I'm making this whole video and doing all this work to switch over to SST, all because I'm frustrated that I have to pay $1.34. So that kind of shows a lot about my own personality and how much I love penny pinching. So it's probably a me issue and not an Amplify issue, to be honest with you all. But there's just something wrong, like I mentioned, and I just wanted to get to the bottom of it. One thing we can do is we can go to CloudFront, because I do believe this is spinning up a CloudFront distribution. I think one of the beauties of like AWS CDK and CloudFormation and SST is that you have insight into every single thing that's being deployed to Amazon. Right now, I can go to my distribution and I can look at it, right? Here is the one that's being deployed, my example app, and I have full control over everything. I can configure this thing the way I want it to be configured. The alternative with Amplify, you have no idea about anything under the hood, okay? They abstract away all that stuff from you. You don't even get to see your CloudFront distribution. You don't get to see your Lambdas. You don't get to see your API gateways. It's all been abstracted away, which is good if the abstraction actually allows you to bleed through and configure stuff. But like we just saw, I can't overwrite the caching strategy for CloudFront, which means when I use Google Analytics, basically the entire cache is just ruined. So going here, this thing is still deploying. This thing can honestly take 15 minutes, 20 minutes to deploy your CloudFront distribution. And again, I'd have to go look up how to set up a custom domain with the SST library, but with CloudFront, it's pretty easy. You basically just like edit this. You go in here, you add a certificate, you add a name. But it's just more engineering time and effort to understand how all this stuff works under the hood, which is, again, why I think companies like Vercel are so important and useful, because as a developer, if you're not really into DevOps and you just want to build features and ship applications, there's a lot of extra stuff you have to learn to set up like all this other stuff. Okay, it just finished. That was probably a 5-10 minute deployment. It says the CloudFront distribution has been deployed, I believe. Let's see if SST is still doing its thing. It says create complete, so it made some progress. That's good. And now it's setting up a bunch of different things. It's setting up IAM policies. Who knows what else it's setting up. All right, it finished. Now, if we go to the site, let me open this URL and let's hope this actually works. We should see a Next.js application, and it has been fully deployed to CloudFront. And let's go ahead and like refresh the page. Does it make any type of network calls at all? Like if I go to API, I don't know. Let's just go to next/static. I want to see, are these things being cached in CloudFront? And it says hit from CloudFront. That's good. Now let's change the cookie real quick. Let's just see if we can add a cookie here. Let's just do this. I'll just go ahead and add a cookie. Go back to network. Go ahead and make sure I click on the framework one again. Click framework. And it still says hit from CloudFront. So let me also make sure, did it send the cookie over? Did it send the request cookie? It did. It sent the cookie over. So I don't, this is a preliminary test, but I set a cookie manually and I refreshed the page and it still was a hit from CloudFront, which is a very good sign. So I'm happy with that. Now there's more testing I need to do. And one thing I do want to check out is if I actually go to my Lambda services, I should be able to see them. I should be able to see my Cloud Watch logs. If I type in like example here, let's just type example. Let's type my example app. So these are all the things that are deployed for you when you run the SST deploy. Which one is the one we actually care about? Let's see, image optimization handler for Next.js, server handler for Next.js. I don't know what this one is. My example, my custom resource handler. Lambda function for auto deleting objects in an example. So again, like I don't know what any of this stuff is, but at the very least, we have the ability to dive into this and we can actually see how this stuff is working. We can get the actual analytics on all this stuff. None of this stuff is abstracted away. We can see within the last 15 minutes that, hey, we made a request here. In fact, if I keep on refreshing this page, I'm assuming it's server-side rendered, and we should see that get hit a couple of times in our logs, which is good. So let's just go ahead and refresh this and see if those pop up. Usually this has like a 1 minute resolution, so it might take a little while for those refreshes to pop up. I don't think this actually hits an API either, so I didn't really verify the API is working or if that's cached, but at least the static assets are cached. I'm kind of happy about that. Oh, here we go. There's my refreshes. All 9 of them popped up, which is good. That means we can go and we can view these in CloudWatch and see the logs print out and try to figure out what's going on. Go to the log stream, and we can see that we hit our endpoint a various amount of times, and there's no logging in our application, but those at least print out. So what I'm trying to say is you can still use Amplify. If you're not using Google Analytics, it's fine. I think it's fine. Me personally, I like to use Google Analytics. I'm sure there's other things out there that provide analytics on your site that don't require cookies that change every time a user tries to refresh their page. That's something that you shouldn't have to think about, right? You shouldn't have to worry about your stuff not being cached because you're using Google Analytics or not. So for anyone out there who's looking for an alternative and who wants to actually like own their infrastructure and be able to use AWS CDK for deploying everything, definitely check out SST. I'm going to give it a more solid try with the T3 stack. Again, this was just with the normal Next deployment. So I want to see how it handles with the T3 stack, if it's more performant than Amplify, how much do I get charged? That is an issue with billing, is that now that everything is deployed as individual little resources, I'm not sure if there's an easy way to go and get the billing of that thing, right? So I would probably have to go here and figure out like a tag that's associated with all these resources. And then I have to go and like go into the billing dashboard and search by tag for my example app, right? So we have SST app, SST stage. So it's just a little bit more overhead of understanding like how this stuff works. How can I measure the actual charges for this individual thing I just deployed? Before is pretty easy. It's just everything is wrapped up in a nice box and a bow with Amplify, and I knew how much Amplify was charging me. But now, since it kind of just spun up a ton of different resources all over my Amazon account, I don't have an easy way to access that from what I understand. But I'm sure someone smarter than me can just say, oh, you just have to go and search by a tag, or you just have to go and search by your CloudFormation distribution. All right, so I believe this is the CloudFormation distribution that kind of wraps up all of those resources. I do think at some point you will hit a limit with CloudFormation. Usually the limit's like 200 resources. So I'm kind of curious how SST handles that, or if CDK will just kind of handle that for you under the hood. Because when I first started on my project at work, we used to hit these limits all the time. We had to basically split up our stack into various stacks to even get this working with CloudFormation. It was a hot mess. So I am kind of concerned that this uses CloudFormation under the hood, but I'm willing to be open and give it another try. Yeah, it looks like there's tags. So these tags should be applied to every resource. So if I look for SST app in my example, I might be able to search billing by that. Yeah, so here, if you go to Cost Explorer and you go to tags, I think at some point you should be able to type in this tag. Yeah, I don't know. If anyone knows, let me know. I thought there was a way to search by tags, and I would think that my example app would be an available tag here. But maybe I have to wait an hour for stuff to be kind of propagated. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this video up. I just went on a giant rant video, a giant rabbit hole of walking through how I debug stuff, and kind of finished off with showing you an alternative solution, which I'm going to start looking into, which just released like a week or two ago. Please leave a comment. If there's any information you have with Amplify and like the issue I ran into, let me know. Otherwise, yeah, I think this could also be a really useful alternative solution if you want to actually like get more into the DevOps side of things and own the infrastructure that is being created under the hood to host your next application. But at the end of the day, I will say I have nothing against Vercel. I think Vercel has one of the best developer experiences when it comes to deploying Next, and it makes sense because they're the ones who create Next as the framework, right? So they have first class support for all the Next features. And if Next were to release a new version or a new feature, Vercel is going to be the one who's going to have that feature available to you all. The one issue I have with open source software, which I'm not trying to talk poorly about this framework, I'm just talking poorly about open source in general, is that a lot of these open source projects get started and then after 6 months to a year, they are no longer maintained and they die off, which I hope is not the case for this SST library, but usually it's only a select few developers who are basically owning this project. And if those developers decide they want to do something else with their life, this entire library usually just ends up dying off unless someone else is willing to take the torch and kind of walk forward with that. So I'm going to wrap this video up. I've been rambling for a long time, and I'm sure you guys are tired of hearing me talk. And have a good day and happy coding.